Good morning, good morning, good morning. Happy Monday. Surprise. I did not plan to go live today, but I've decided we're going to go live. So I'm actually streaming on a couple different platforms. So this is the first for me. So I'm doing like a couple different platforms at one time. But good morning. Good morning for those of you who are catching this live. If you are watching me live, please drop a comment to let me know where you are, where you're watching from. Just say good morning, say hello. My name is Kathleen Day. I am a school counselor by degree, a coach and a consultant by choice, working with individuals and organizations to help them improve the life and outcomes for students, particularly focused on those who are experiencing the results of trauma. And I decided to do a video today because I usually check the groups that I'm in, the ones that I operate and the ones that I'm in at least, once or twice a week, to just see, can I offer, my suggestions, offer my experience, my ideas. The life of a school counselor, school social worker is one that is incredibly challenging because you don't always get to have people to just kind of bounce ideas off of. So at least, a couple times a week, I try to go in and just answer as many questions as I can. And every question that I looked to answer this morning was about behavior, every single one, which is so crazy to me because this past weekend I had my behavior intervention bootcamp on flash sale. So I was like, where were these people when when the flash sale was going on? But that's okay. But I decided I wanted to kind of give some strategies and suggestions for those of you who are going back on this Monday morning, and maybe you're not feeling incredibly encouraged about going back this Monday morning because there's a lot of stuff going on with kids right now. You're being pulled in a lot of different directions. So I wanted to kind of explain to you my approach to what I call popcorn classrooms. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context because I know there's people that are younger than me that watch what I'm doing, but I am, if you're 40s or older, you will immediately understand this. If you're under 40, this might need a little context. So I use the term popcorn classroom because of what it's like to pop popcorn on the stove. So if you pre-microwave popcorn, I think air poppers were a thing, but we just didn't have one. So pre-microwave popcorn, you had to pop your popcorn on the stove. And so you put your pot on the stove with some oil in the bottom. You put, a cup of, kernels in the bottom or what have you, and you would watch it and you would wait until the oil was hot enough to pop the popcorn. And the way you knew that is, you would see like one kernel would go and then there'd be a second kernel that would go. And if you get to about 5 kernels, that's a really good indication that the temperature in the pot is hot enough. And that's when you put the lid on and you start to shaking and all the popcorn continues to go. Okay. And so what I call a popcorn classroom is a classroom where, for whatever reason, and we're talking about some of those reasons, kids just are randomly kind of popping off. You have these externalizing behaviors that are just kind of popping off. And they don't always seem like they're related, right? They don't always seem like they go together or like there's one common theme. The kids might not even be friends or really socialize together, but it's like, what's going on in this classroom? That's what I call a popcorn classroom. When there's been a pattern of time, you've had a variety of kids, sometimes the same kids, sometimes different kids, 3 or 4, maybe 5 or more, that are having some really disruptive externalizing behaviors. I call that a popcorn classroom. So first question I have for you today, do you know a popcorn classroom? If you know a popcorn classroom, whichever platform you're watching this on, go ahead and raise your hand and say me so that we know we're not alone in, being called in to help with these popcorn classrooms. Now, the key here is when you have a popcorn classroom, my recommendation is not to start at the individual student level. If it's clear that there's more, if there's 30 kids in the classroom, and what we know about mental health challenges, which can be external, have externalizing behaviors that go with them, 20% of kids in that classroom could have a diagnosable mental illness. So if there's 30 kids in a classroom, as many as 6 kids could have a diagnosable mental health condition. That doesn't necessarily mean those will all be externalizing behaviors. That doesn't mean that they'll all be defiant or disruptive behaviors. If you have, in my opinion, what my experience has taught me, if you have, in say, a class of 20 or 30 kids, 4 or 5, who, and it can be not the same kids, but maybe 4 or 5 kids over a period of weeks who are needing some external support, you probably have a popcorn classroom. And that popcorn classroom, I wouldn't start at the individual level, because if the factors that created the popcorn are still there, you might solve it with one student and then it'll pop up with someone else. Using my popcorn reference, right? If I want to stop the popcorn from popping, I can't just take one kernel out. I got to remove it from the heat. So I got to change the environment. So here are the 3 things that I recommend that you do if you think you might have a popcorn classroom. So the first thing you want to look at is what's coming in to the classroom from the external environment. There's a couple things that you think of in that are like pop off right now, what you might be seeing. So number one, you might be seeing some external, some trauma coming into the classroom, right? We're all on the tail end of the pandemic, but right here in the, at the kind of the crescendoing of the housing market and the recession that is causing a lot of financial instability. You might see this kind of social unrest of the last couple of years coming into the classroom. So what I would say, for if you're a counselor or a social worker, get ready. There's going to be an increase in homeless students. There's going to be an increase in families having financial difficulty, which can show up in the behaviors of children. If you live in a community where that is already the case, where you maybe have an organization that has recently laid off a lot of employees, or a job that has closed down, or you've seen an increase in evictions recently, those are all things that can be coming into the classroom, creating this popcorn environment, okay? The second thing that might be causing that that coming into that environment is if there's been some conflicts or some disconnect between parents, families, and the school. So if you don't have an active family engagement program, if you're getting a lot of conflicts where parents are kind of talking bad about the school or talking bad about the district, if there's been recent changes in leadership, all of those things can contribute to negative energy, negative perceptions coming into the classroom. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that all of these kids are consciously choosing to disrupt your classroom. In a lot of instances, what you're actually going to see is that these kids are like subconsciously bringing that to the forefront. However, I've definitely seen it where it's super duper conscious and they're not only bringing it into the classroom. My mom said, I don't have to listen, but they're also telling other kids the same thing. So those are things that can be coming into the classroom. Obviously, one of the things that you want to work on, if that's the case, is increasing that family connection and family engagement. The second thing that you want to consider is the actual classroom environment. This is huge. It's almost always overlooked. Okay, the structure of the classroom, whether or not kids are getting access to daylight hours, like are the windows always closed? Are the highlights always on? I've seen, a lot of times we have the highlights on, kids have headaches, they can't really articulate what they're feeling, so their behaviors are more defiant because they're in pain or they don't feel good, right? So look at the structure of the classroom. A lot of times I get questions about kids eloping. So pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, kids running out of the building is what we would call eloping, or running out of the classroom. Sometimes just simply moving the teacher's desk so that it's closer to the door, changing the whatever is on the door so that it's got like pictures on it so the kids are not looking at the door, maybe restructuring where the desks are seated so the kids aren't facing the door. Like all of these things aren't going to necessarily eliminate it completely, but the structure of the classroom can decrease it, right? So if a kid has to walk past me or run past me to get to the door, if there's any conscious thought on them eloping, that is going to reduce that. The other thing is we're putting some kind of visual barriers between them and the door to have them consciously aware of alternatives to running out of the classroom. So look at the structure of the classroom, a classroom that's super cluttered, that doesn't have organization, or that looks like it's unkept or unclean. All of those things can contribute to mental health challenges, right? If you are struggling with anxiety or depression and you live in a cluttered space, or your home is a mess, those things will trigger you to feel worse. If you feel worse, you're more likely to externalize. So looking at the environment is a great thing for you to do. And then the last one is, and this is probably the one I think is most often overlooked. When you get a referral for an individual student, don't just look at that individual student's behavior, observe the entire classroom. That means you're looking at the teacher's behavior, the teacher's mood, the teacher's interactions and communications, the relationships between students, the relationships between the students and the teachers. Do you see one type of interaction between a teacher and one student, and then a different type of interaction between other teachers in that same, other students in that same teacher? Looking at all of those pieces of the puzzle might indicate that, hey, we don't have a classroom that has gelled, right? We don't have a classroom that they have any connection or attachment to each other, or we have a classroom that's connected to each other and they are not attached to their teacher. All of those things can contribute to having a popcorn classroom. If that's the case, your first goal is to work on how can we create more connection and attachment between these individual students and each other, and possibly with the classroom teacher, right? So those are the things that you all want to look at. Now, my recommendation for you, once you have gone through those 3 steps, so those are the first things I would do for the classroom that you're saying, like, I'm having the most trouble with this classroom. I would go down that little kind of checklist and say, have I looked at these things? Have I addressed these things? Now, once you've done that, then you can look at those individual students who are still seeming to show a little bit more of a challenge, right? Who are still showing, like, more often than not, they're not able to manage their behavior. More often than not, they're not able to regulate their emotions. And that is where a workshop like the Behavior Intervention Bootcamp can come in and give you those additional strategies on the individual level, right? So if you have a student who's individually struggling with managing their emotion, there's a couple of things you want to look at. How can I help them identify emotion? How can I help them to express that emotion? How can I help them to, change from one emotion to another, right? And once you've done those things, then within that context of that classroom that is newly evaluated and adjusted, you'll be able to see some improvement along the way. Okay, so I'm going to make sure wherever you're watching this video, above or below, if you're watching it on social media, you'll see links in my bio. If you're watching it on YouTube, you'll look in the description. I'm going to make sure I have a couple of links to some things that I have available to support this. I'm going to share with you some resources that are available in my storefront, including the Behavior Intervention Bootcamp, which was taught live to counselors and social workers from around the world about a month and a half ago. The recording is available and it's chocked full of resources. If you purchase the Behavior Intervention Bootcamp, you also get access to my school-based session planner, which walks you through accessing over 300 additional resources, worksheets, YouTube videos, you name it, to help you with those interventions on an individual level. But I've also got some really simple things in there. Like, I've got a stop sign. I always, one of the things, if you have an eloper, I always say put a stop sign on the door, or put something on the door that would at least stop them or slow them down long enough for the teacher to get into the room or get, towards the door. Sometimes it's just as simple as changing out the doorknob. Maybe you could put the doorknob, usually we have like those kind of knobs that you pull up or pull down. If you turn it back to an old fashioned kind of round doorknob, and you put one of those, doorknob like safety features on there, sometimes, again, that's not going to stop them, but it'll slow them down long enough for the teacher to get over to the door. So I'll put a couple of those things, links to those things, in my description of this. But hopefully that has been helpful for you guys, and feel free to drop any questions or comments, and I'll come back and check them out soon. So you guys have a great rest of your Monday.